sure we'll probably have some more folks coming in. So thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm Amy Bacco. I am the Digital Projects Librarian at WMU, and I'm also on the board of the advisory board for the Humanities Center. We're really pleased that you could join us tonight for this series that we have, Capturing Community, Digital Storytelling, and Community-Driven Archives. Big thanks to our the NEH Humanities for Everybody grant that we have here at WMU that made this possible. And we're excited the library and the center has come together to co-host this event. This is kind of hopefully the start of a lot of digital humanities, digital scholarship, digital storytelling work on campus. So this important community-driven and collaborative work, captures the rich history of historically underrepresented communities, memorializes important social justice and anti-racist activism, and preserves the firsthand accounts of these activists, community leaders, and history makers for future generations. So we're excited that this is our, first step towards this. I'm very pleased to be welcoming Nancy Liliana Godoy. She is joining us from Arizona State University, where she leads the Community-Driven Archives Initiative. Nancy is the Associate Archivist for the library's Chicano Research Collection and serves as the head of ASU Archives. Nancy's work is focused on advocacy for Latinx and historically marginalized communities in libraries and archives. She's a graduate of the prestigious Knowledge River program, received the Arizona Humanities Rising Star Award, and was named a mover and shaker by Library Journal. She has also received multiple large-scale grants to support her work in capturing and preserving local history and archival materials for underrepresented groups in Arizona. These were just a few of your accomplishments I pulled out, Nancy. You have many more, and thank you so much for joining us. And without further delay, I am going to hand this over to Nancy, and she will be sharing with us her work in creating the Community-Driven Archives Initiative at ASU.
Thank you so much, Amy. So thank you for the invitation, and I'm really excited to share our work with everyone. Were you planning on recording? Is this recording already? Okay, perfect. So I wear multiple hats here at ASU. I've been here 10 years this January. I received tenure in 2017. So I got this job straight out of grad school, and I plan on being here for the rest of my career, to build alongside community members and fix a lot of gaps within our historical records here in Arizona. So today I'll be talking about community-driven archives, how our work is centering BIPOC and LGBTQ memory and knowledge. Hopefully this works. Can you see the next slide? Yes. So my day job is being the archivist of the Chicano Research Collection, which is the largest Latinx Latino collection in the state of Arizona. It documents local history from the 1800s to present time. The collection was actually established by my predecessor, Dr. Christine Marin. You see her on the slide right next to me. We took that picture on our 45th anniversary of the collection. She established the collection during the Chicano movement of the 1970s, which was a part of a bigger civil rights movement throughout the country. So, if it wasn't for Dr. Marin, none of these important archival materials would be here. And, it took 40 years of her advocacy work plus 10 years of my work to keep this work going. I am also the unofficial archivist of LGBTQ collections. We have the BJ Budd Memorial Archives, which is a collection that documents local history from the 1970s to the early 2000s. In 2015, I helped establish the Arizona LGBT History Project, which is an ongoing initiative with the library, ASU Library, and local LGBT organizations throughout the state. And, you know, we're trying to process these collections as they're donated and make them accessible to the public. Thanks to an Andrew W. Mellon Foundation grant that we received in 2017 that just ended this July. We received $450,000 for a 3.5-year project to basically work with historically marginalized communities. Part of that funding provided support for us to digitize this collection, and it will be accessible later this month on our digital repository. Really great photographs and periodicals that were created, produced, and preserved by community members. So, you know, knowing that ASU has taken, you know, for the last 50 years has been committed to you know, empowering community members and preserving local history, there is still really big gaps in our archives. In 2012, we did a survey. 2012 was the year I started working here at ASU. My colleagues throughout the state at different repositories throughout our big universities here, Northern Arizona University, University of Arizona, and ASU participated, and also local historical societies throughout the state. They did a survey called the Arizona Archives Matrix Project. We wanted to see what was being documented and what wasn't being documented. The survey found that a lot of our historically minoritized communities and underserved communities were almost erased from local history. According to the data, the Latino, Black, Asian, Pacific Islander, and LGBT community in 2012 made up 42%. That has gone up the last 10 years. I think we're like at 43 or 44% now. They make up that population almost half, but they're only represented in 0 to 2% of known archival collections. So, you know, let that sink in a little bit, right? When you think about memory work and you think about, you know, what stories are documented and the power of memory, right? So what has been preserved? We found that there's a rich history of white supremacy and settler colonialism in the state. Some of the top 10 documented subjects are on the screen. Anglo pioneer history, Arizona history before 1912, business records, crime during territorial period, which was before 1912. Geronimo, Native American Indigenous history, military and mining history, and tombstone and Wyatt Earp. So when you look at the collections, you know, local archives and archivists have preserved archives that center whiteness, right? And exclude other community members. And this rhetoric has been, you know, reproduced in different ways. And because of that, local communities have been dehumanized. And you see lacking a record, lacking a memory has led to communities being targeted, aggressively targeted by local legislation that, again, promotes white supremacy. In 2010, for those of you who follow Arizona news, in 2010, the ethnic studies, more specifically Mexican American studies, was banned in Arizona, more specifically Tucson, Arizona. And that's been an ongoing fight to bring that back the last 10, 12 years, almost 12 years. We also had SB 1070, which was, famously known as the Show Me Your Papers bill. It allowed police to racially profile and criminalize undocumented people or just people of color. So knowing this, right, there's a lack of trust between local communities, especially communities of color, and big institutions and government, including universities. So the last 10 years, I've really focused on building relationships that, center communities and center their knowledge. And, we're here to support and to provide guidance as professional archivists at an academic institution, but we're not leading this work. This work is being led by the community. And so we really focus on building safe spaces for everyone, especially these communities. So like I mentioned, the Community-Driven Archives Initiative started in 2017. Before, actually, the Community-Driven Archives Initiative was a dream I had as a grad student. Back in 2010, 2011, I was seeing all the things that were going on around me, and I saw a need to help my communities. I identify as a queer woman of color. And so for me, I wanted to do something with my life and something with my privilege. And I think, going to school kind of helped me find my way, find my way and how I could do that to support my communities. And so it's been interesting to kind of see this develop. So if I have any grad students on this call, dream big, and anything is possible if people work together and we humanize each other. And so the Community-Driven Archives Initiative, I'm really thankful for the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, because this work would have developed on its own, but not as fast as it did because of the money we received. It was a big chunk of money. And to be very honest, I didn't have support from the university or the library for this specific work before I got the Mellon grant. So, to think about institutional power too, and what we prioritize when we do some of this equity and diversity and inclusion work, right? So, there's some core principles in the work that we do. Partnerships is a big thing. Like I mentioned, we're building strong relationships with communities who are breaking cycles of injustice and erasure and fighting for sovereignty, especially Indigenous communities that we're working with. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. We're cultivating collective memory and solidarity between communities, especially these communities who in the past have had conflict within their communities, right? Anti-Blackness, or homophobia, right? Things that have kept communities apart. We're acknowledging our similarities, our differences, and again, trying to humanize each other. And remember, that's a big part of the work that we're doing, is remembering. And we're also ensuring that communities members are able to engage at all levels of the preservation process, right? As archivists, librarians, we only think about, as archivists, we think about collection development, right? Bringing in stuff. But, we're measuring our success in other ways, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more. It's not just about filling the gaps. There's more to the work that we're doing. And empowering community members, like I said, from every point of the process. Knowledge. So all these pictures that you're seeing are actually photos from our events. This is one of my favorite pictures. We are working with our elders, adults, but we're also working with children. And I think for me, I have an 8-year-old son, and he's been my kid archivist. I've been testing things out with him to kind of see what engages him. And we've been creating workshops and events specifically for children across the state. This is an event we did with the Salt River Tribe here in Arizona. We gave, I'll explain a little bit more about what the events consist of in a little bit, but I just wanted to acknowledge this photo and that we're centering communities, their knowledge, their lived experiences. We're also, like I said, encouraging intergenerational and intersectional safe spaces that support lifelong learning, right? We're sharing knowledge that communities can then take into their communities. Communities are bringing information, knowledge into the library, into the archives. We're also supporting community healing projects that acknowledge BIPOC, LGBTQ resiliency and historical trauma, because that is a reoccurring theme in the work that we're doing. It comes up. Very traumatic moments come up in the work that we're doing. Access. So we're implementing services and programs that promote equal access and stewardship responsibilities. We provide free archival supplies. The little girls in the other picture were actually working with an archive kit that we give out to community members. I'll explain a little bit more what's in the kits in a few slides. And we're trying to preserve the stories of not just this generation, but previous generations, right? And we're supporting community archivists as they establish their own archival collections and repositories. Again, it's not about what we bring in, collections, it's about what we help to build outside of the university as well. We use the term community archivist because it gives communities the power and the authority they deserve. But we also acknowledge that, for those people who do want to go into this in a professional field, we do promote the Knowledge River program, things like that kind of support more BIPOC and queer potentially people who might want to go and become a professional archivist as well and make it a profession, right? So, you know what, before I move on to this, any questions so far? Give myself a little break. If you don't have any questions, you can save them for the end.
And if anybody wants to put any questions in the chat, I will make sure that they get to Nancy if we can't bring other people into chat.
Okay, cool. So I'll keep going. I think so. Like I mentioned, as a queer woman of color who is also an archivist, I've never seen a place for myself in archival theory. There's a lot of people who are talking about community archives, right? Especially for these communities, but I hope that we see more publications, more acknowledgement of all the work our communities have been doing historically, right? One of my colleagues, Alex Soto, who manages the Labriola Center, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides, he mentions, that Indigenous communities are the original memory keepers, right? And we don't really, as a profession, we don't really acknowledge theory, praxis that has always been there, just not necessarily in academia, right? And so I think, so for me, I've been very influenced by BIPOC queer authors, activists, teachers, and one of them is Gloria Anzaldúa. who, I like to say that the Community Driven Archives Initiative, in a personal way, I've embraced a love ethic that uses her theory of conocimiento, or the awakening of consciousness as a framework for the work that we do. Um, again, we're wanting to center our theory and how historically we have preserved history. So conocimiento translates to knowledge. It's a Spanish term. And Gloria Anzaldúa believed that knowledge can be used to decolonize, liberate, and heal the minds, bodies, and souls of marginalized communities. Gloria Anzaldúa was a queer Chicana author, teacher from Texas. If you look her up, she produced so much work before she passed away in the early 2000s. She's very well known within the feminist theory world. And, within her conocimiento process, she believed that community members, people, when you think about healing, you go through 7 stages. I won't go too much into this, but I believe on a personal level that what we've built is a sacred healing space that is led by community members, and by those of us who identify as BIPOC and queer, professional archivists, right? So I believe that our community archivists experience these different stages as they learn how to preserve their archives, they reclaim narratives, and also build a collective memory that heals historical trauma, begins to heal that historical trauma. And, the journey of conocimiento, remembering, it's queers conventional ways of knowing and healing by promoting a holistic approach that is non-binary and non-linear. And I love this quote by Anzaldúa, which says that to be in conocimiento with one another or a group is to share knowledge, pool resources, meet each other, compare liberation struggles and social movements, histories, share how we confront institutional power, and process and heal wounds. I just published a paper in a journal, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. If you really want to know more about this, I think I did a pretty good job of kind of explaining how community members go through the process. So a little bit more information about the actual events that we host. So we host a Archives 101 workshop, basically, where people learn how to appraise, arrange, and describe their own archives. We give out the starter kits, the archive starter kits with supplies that they need to preserve their history. This photo is from an event we did with the Black Family Genealogy Group here in Phoenix. We had about 40 Black elders attended the event. It was really beautiful. There was a moment where people started singing, Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is known as the Black National Anthem. Somebody had old lyrics that they had in their old lyrics to the song that they had in their archive, and they shared with everyone, and it was so spontaneous. But it's, again, what those moments for me are very sacred and just show how the work that we're doing goes beyond just archival theory, right? We are also hosting scanning and oral history days. We're in the process of breaking these events into longer individual events, because our current events are about an hour and 30 minutes to 2 hours. These days we would usually be in person with people for like 3 to 4 hours. This was pre-COVID, so a lot has changed because of COVID. We haven't done an event with community in person in almost a year and a half, right? Since March of 2020. And so I think for people who don't have physical material, like archival material, photographs, documents, ephemera. Um, they still have stories. So we're showing people how to use equipment to do oral history interviews, introducing people to digital literacy skills, learning from them, right? What resources do we need, or what services do we need to change in order to make sure that people have access? A big part of our community doesn't have those digital literacy skills, right? They barely have English speaking skills, right? A lot of our communities are Spanish speaking only, including my parents. I come from a household with my primary language used to be Spanish growing up. So how are we reaching these community members? And so it's definitely listening, hearing what their needs are, and modifying our services and programs as needed. 2020, COVID really taught us that we can't be doing online events only because, certain people don't have access to technology, just phones, right? So we're also showing people how to scan their own archives. This woman, I always love talking about her because she came to our event seeing that we were going to provide free scans. Getting to know her and going through her archive, we found out that her dad was this super important figure within the music scene, Latino music scene here in Arizona. And she just had all of this amazing stuff in her garage. And nobody had ever really acknowledged her dad, or, his legacy. And so, we're definitely finding a lot of hidden history that has just been, either it's been lost or it's, stuck in people's homes. People have forgotten about it. So we are creating an active site that generates the growth of community archivists. We've been collecting data for the grant. And the data basically shows that 98.5% of people who attend our workshops, our events, want to be included in Arizona history. They feel prepared to be community archivists after receiving training, and they see the big urgency to preserve our history. We're losing, a lot of our elders. COVID really is impacting our BIPOC community, especially here in Arizona. Um, so it's working. What we've built is working and will continue to work and make an impact. So I like to say that the initiative moves beyond equity and diversity and inclusion work and beyond focusing on collection development, right? So we're measuring our success by how many people attend our events, the partnerships we create and sustain, right? It's not just about doing one token event with a community organization and never hearing back from us again, right? We provide access to collections, our community-driven collections that ASU currently owns. So how are people using that content? And then how many people or organizations are able to establish their own archives? Here in Tempe, Arizona, there's a little small community right next to the university that's been able to stay here and not be gentrified. It's mostly, the city is called Guadalupe, and it's mostly indigenous Yaqui community members, and also local Chicano Latino community who has been here, before we were a state. And they have decided to get funding within the Yaqui community to establish their own historical society. So we have been training people the last 2 years to kind of become community archivists and start collecting stuff from the community in order for them to create their own historical society. Which would be managed by them, which is so exciting. It won't be managed by the state. It won't be managed by our local government. It's going to be managed by them. So I love talking about our student archivist. So I think a lot of the work that we're doing is reimagining the traditional definition and function of an archive, right? Which has excluded our communities. And I think the last 3 years, since 3.5 years since we got the Mellon grant, I've seen that our student archivists are because we've centered them, they're producing amazing, besides the 101 courses that we're teaching, workshops that we're teaching, our student archivists are leading their own events as well. So we had a student do an event just focusing on archives and queer past. So people came to the event and shared, some of their personal archival material. We had a student do a show and share on Black Love. That was probably one of my favorite events during COVID. It was very beautiful to see community members share, and for them to identify, or what is Black Love, right? What does it mean to them? And it was a really safe space for community members, but also a good place for us to stop, listen, and humanize each other. So all of our students, they just graduated this May, so I miss them so much. They all come from different backgrounds. We have Myra, who is actually going to start law school. So she's going to become a lawyer. But she considers herself a community archivist, right? She went through this program with us. She feels empowered, and she's going to take that knowledge into her field and hopefully change things within that area in some way, right? We also have students who are, our student Elise is an opera major. She's actually went off to Broadway. And again, taking that knowledge with her. I think what I've heard from our students, and you can see some of the quotes that I pulled from their student blogs. So during their working experience here, they worked with our team. They were our team. And they shared their experiences through blogs. These blog posts are found on our website if you're interested and want to read more. It's definitely a good resource to kind of just, again, see the impact and, the possibilities of what you can potentially do at your institution, right? How to really engage and empower your students who can be doing this work, who need the support, who need all the resources possible to do this really important work, right? And then also like how to compensate them, right? This is a lot of not only our students, but our people who are working on this subject, right? How are we compensating emotional labor that goes into this work, right? Trying to create these safe spaces does take a lot of effort, especially, like I said, working from big institutions. So community archivists are challenging the way historical records are created as they redefine what an archive is, what should be included, and who should have access. This is an event we did right before COVID. It was a Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead celebration. As you can see, our team was in this tiny little house, mostly Latinx, Latino community members. We were working with an organization called Trans Queer Pueblo, which basically supports undocumented Latinx queer community here. And they invited us to come and participate in the event, but also people, for those people who don't know, who haven't seen the movie Coco, the Day of the Dead is basically a time to remember our ancestors, people who have passed away, And people create an altar and remembrance, and people usually share, like, people don't realize it, but people share their archives on these altars, right? And so what we did was they invited us. We were in this tiny little closet. Our students were scanning photos for people, and we were printing out um, copies and allowing people to use those copies on their altars. And then we were also providing archival supplies for people who wanted to preserve the original. Another thing was people, because of migration, migrating throughout this area, they didn't necessarily have physical archives, but they had like a picture of their grandmother on their phone. And so we printed out images for people and allowed people to also use those on the altars. Um, so again, right, it's not an archive is not a repository for the communities that we work with. It's a living thing. It's a part of who we are. It's sacred. So the I mentioned this earlier. My colleague Alex Soto, who is in charge of the Librariola Center here at ASU Library, it's basically a center to support Indigenous studies, support Indigenous scholars, faculty, students, the community. So they have used our CDA concept to create their own project, their own program, and um, now that the Mellon grant ended, they're continuing to do this work with different community members. And I wanted to quickly talk about the person on the right who's wearing the shirt "Strong, Resilient, Indigenous." That is Lulu. She is a student worker of Alex in the Labriola Center, and her she's part of the O'odham Nation here in Arizona. But her specific tribal community is not federally recognized. And so she has been, and according to actual white anthropologists, her community is extinct. But as you can tell, she's a living person. And so she has been working as a community archivist, student archivist. She's working with her community to gather information. And you see some of those resources in the picture. She's using those resources to get recognition from the government. So, when we're talking about empowering community members, she probably wouldn't have been able to do this if it wasn't for the CDA program, right? And for her passion to create change and to heal her community in that way, right? To have recognition and to be accepted, not by the government, but by her community, right? Um, and so the CDA lens can really be used by anyone who is really committed to doing this type of work. It can be recreated. And we're actually in the process later this month, we'll be um, providing toolkits. So that if you want to recreate all of these events, you'll have a booklet, a PowerPoint presentation, you'll have the handouts that we give out, you'll have the majority of what you need to get started and to try to recreate this within your own institution. Uh, so I know that I might be running out of time. Um,
You're good.
okay, okay,
Don't worry about it. Thank you.
okay. So just talking about the future of the program, right? So the Mellon grant did end in July. Um, the university, after the murder of George Floyd, right, there was a lot of in 2012, right, there was a lot um of I would say that I got permanent funding for this initiative because of the Black Lives Matter movement and the pressure that a lot of people put on big institutions, including universities. And so during this time frame, our president, Dr. Crow, Michael Crow, made a commitment to support the Black community, especially here in Arizona. And part of that initiative, it's called the LIFT Initiative, was a commitment to continue the program, the CDA program, to keep working with Black communities, but also with these other historically marginalized communities. And so thanks to that, we have a permanent budget to continue this work. So that's really exciting. I think when you hear about our community archive projects, they're usually grant funded, and then after the grant is over, nothing happens, right? I think it's a reoccurring thing, not just in archives, right, in academia. And so I think, you know, thinking of what we can do moving forward, we were able to retain our Black archivist, who will be focusing on building Black archives within the university. So that's very exciting, to know that, you know, we're dedicating one person to specifically work with those communities. It's a long time coming, right? It should have been done a long time ago, but there's finally real financial commitment to continue the work. So, you know, I wanted to briefly kind of go through some of the things that we've been thinking about, think about our strategic planning, what other grants we can potentially go towards to keep building, right? Because this isn't going to stop, it's going to keep growing. And I wanted to talk about our student archivist again, right? We're missing a big opportunity in this state to work with K through 12. And especially our BIPOC students who in Arizona, I believe currently as of 2017 make up 80-something% of our student population in the state. It's really increased. And so how can we introduce, like I said, archival theory, you know, those basic concepts to students, and the importance of preserving local history, right? Their stories that haven't been preserved and are not being taught in school, right? I mentioned earlier that our local government is banning ethnic studies and also critical race theory. Our governor just banned that a few months ago during the summer. Another thing is improving the educational pipeline to the LIS, library science profession, right? You know, as a person who kind of went through that process, you know, going through the Knowledge River program and then getting this current job, there's definitely things that need to improve in that pipeline. Support before we enter grad school. You know, a lot of us don't even know, our communities don't know that this is a possible career, right? Professional career. And then there's a lack of support after you graduate, right? Especially for BIPOC, queer, young archivists, right? So thinking about how can we improve that pipeline and really support our students, and maybe we can do that through fellowship programs and a residency program that centers, again, their lived experiences and knowledge, and not center the profession, right? Because that becomes very unsafe quickly if you're a person of color and you get placed in a profession that centers whiteness, which is what happens. We're also thinking about doing CDA storybooks. So, you know, what we've noticed is that a lot of local groups have all of these really amazing stories, right? And besides archives, how is that getting preserved? So we're thinking about the idea of helping community members publish their own narratives, allowing them to retain copyright, and then use those resources in whatever way they want to, right? Once it becomes a published resource, those could potentially go into our school system, and you know, local kids could be learning about history from their neighbors, right? I think one really important thing that we've learned the last 3.5, 4 years is that by talking to community members, people who are associated with the university or any university have gone into communities in the past, BIPOC communities, and have taken memories, stories for their research purpose, right? But nothing has ever been given to the community, not even acknowledgement, right? In a book or, in a documentary or anything like that. So I think what we're doing is not only building relationships, but mending relationships, right? You know, a researcher or faculty might have done this, but that's no longer what we're doing. And, moving forward, how can we support you? And then reimagining, I really like the idea again of working with students, researchers, community members to reimagine the archive. And maybe we can do this through a fellowship program where people, bring in different knowledge sets, and, create a sustainable way to preserve non-traditional archives, right? I have one more slide and then we can have some questions. I just wanted to end with the article I mentioned earlier. It was an article, Community-Driven Archives, Conocimiento, Healing, and Justice. It was in a special issue on radical empathy and archival practice, Journal of Critical Library and Information Studies. And I just wanted to talk really briefly about some of the bullet points, right? So if you're a professional archivist, if you work within your institution, if you're a student, right, there's current power structures, have, excluded people, have dehumanized people. In order to create real change, there needs to be a redistribution of power and resources that grants communities to do this work on their own, right? And we should be partners in this work. We shouldn't be leading. And, another big thing is that, we need to promote BIPOC and queer archivists to leadership positions, right? I'm currently interim head of our archives department. I've been leading the CDA initiative, and also I'm the associate archivist of the Chicano Research Collection, wearing multiple hats. But in this new leadership position that I've been as interim head, I've definitely seen that what goes on behind the scenes, right? And how you know how lack of communication or lack of leadership higher up might affect this work moving forward, right? And so it's definitely to put those of us who belong to these communities in higher leadership positions so we can provide guidance. We're already doing the emotional labor, but how can we really create change that is sustainable, right? That's the biggest thing I want people to focus on when you hear about our work, is that it's not just a token project, right? It's not just, something that you do to say you're being diverse. This is a real commitment, right? And so I think all archivists, especially white archivists, need to reflect on their privilege and how they can support our communities as they reclaim their place in history and transform archives. If we as archivists, professional archivists, don't work with communities, archives might become obsolete. If it doesn't mean anything to community members, what's we there definitely needs to be more communication between everyone who's doing this work. And, I think there needs to be a sense of accountability as well, right? Especially when it comes to white archivists and administrators. We need to hold our institutions accountable for the lack of action in the past and how that's affected our communities now, right? And what our communities are experiencing, the trauma, the violence that our communities are facing on a daily basis, right? The legacy of passiveness, right? Of not doing anything, of just being, you know, in your bubble and not, you know, making a real commitment for change, it's it leads to more violence. Not doing anything leads to more violence. And I think those of us who are here are here because we want to create change and we want to support our local communities and the communities we serve, right, in our institutions. So that's all I have. I can't believe I talked for an hour. Any questions?
Thank you, Nancy. That was wonderful. I definitely have questions, but if anybody, I don't know, Scott, if we're able to, if people want to raise their hands, if they can talk themselves. We had a few difficulties earlier, but I am happy to field any questions that you want to put in the chat if we are unable to hear your voices. I can start with one of the questions I had is, you know, now that you guys are, you know, you have this initiative well underway and you're capturing all of these important, you know, stories from these communities, what has been the reception for like usage in the archives? Are you seeing a lot more researchers coming in? Are you kind of attracting attention from, I mean, you know, here we are in Michigan. I found what you guys were doing in Arizona. Are you, you know, kind of pulling in kind of a, you know, a large number of people that are already utilizing the resources that you've gathered?
No. I think so. I think because of past exclusion, people don't know what an archive is. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing is 101 introduction for everything. It's for archives, for oral histories, technology, scanning. You know, it's an educational program, right? That provides lifelong learning. You learn something, you take that knowledge to your community, you come back, you learn something new, you bring your own knowledge, right? It's a circle of sharing knowledge and resources. I think for the next phase of the work that we're doing, maybe with the CDA storybooks, right, is when we'll start collecting material, more material, either stories or actual, like, you know, primary resources, right, to kind of help build. I mentioned the survey, right, that kind of helped start this whole, you know, the Matrix project that basically put a lens, highlighted the huge problem and the huge injustice, right? Um, People ask me, what percentage will be okay for you to like not have to worry about this anymore? When is the problem fixed? And I don't like to put a number on it because the minute we put a number on it, we become passive again, and we dehumanize each other again. And so I think, you know, as far as collecting, I'm hoping that the more relationships we build, we'll see more collections coming in. And I think one thing that we're really, you know, looking forward to this semester is making that BJ Budd collection accessible online, because I think, you know, community has been, you know, hearing what we're doing, and it took 3 years to scan that collection and to create metadata for it. Um, and, you know, I think I'm hoping that once we make that accessible, people will know that we're, you know, there's a sense of legitimacy, right? Like, are we being sincere? Are we actually following through with what we're saying? And one of those things is making the collection accessible online. We've been telling people for years that it's going to be accessible online. It's just taken forever to do it, though. But we do. I think it's been hard to bring people to campus physically, because of just, you know, transportation issues, horrible parking on campus, how much it costs to park here. And so I think we're definitely, the next phase is thinking, how can we bring these collections to community members? Not necessarily, all of our events that we did were always outside of the campus. My very first event I did back in 2015, before I had any funding, it was just me running around trying to make things happen, was here on campus, and I had a good turnout, but a lot of people complained about parking and things like that and getting lost on campus. And so after that, we never did an event on campus. All the events were done at community centers, local BIPOC owned bookstores, um, also public libraries. So that if you're thinking about expanding into the community, that might be a good way to do it. But just be aware, what we found that was that, you know, people we weren't necessarily trying to provide services for were showing up to these events, which is okay. We didn't turn anyone away, and we gave people archive kits. But I think, you know, making sure if you're wanting to do this work, make sure you build a relationship with a community organization, um, so that they can co-host events with you. That was a big part of what we're doing, or it's a big part of what we are doing. Yeah.
That just made me think how historically, for our humanities, for everybody, parking is an issue. So it's all campuses everywhere that, you know, put up these barriers sometimes for participation. We have a question from Ann Miles, who is our the director of the Center for the Humanities. And she's asking if you could elaborate on the things you did before funding, kind of all that, the running around, kind of the, you know, boots on the ground work that, you know, led you to this.
Yeah, that was um so I had to be creative. One of the things, so I knew that the university loves to celebrate those token events that happen every month, right? Like Latinx History Month, you know, LGBT History Month, October, September, right? Those are time frames where the university is willing to provide funding for projects like that. And so what I did was I developed and hosted my first workshop thanks to funding that I got from the Latino Heritage Month Committee. And that money helped me basically buy some of my first few archive kits, because the university at that point in time, and most, I would say most institutions would never give archival supplies to community members for free, right? Because the whole idea, I'm not just saying ASU, I'm saying like throughout the work that we do, right? We don't necessarily give free things to people, right? And so I think that kind of helped me implement the seed and be like, look, we can give resources to community members, and then they take this, again, going back to the concept of sharing knowledge and resources, right? Um, and so that was, you know, thinking strategically about funding. Another thing I did, which I encourage people to do, I contacted Hollinger specifically and I said, hey, I'm working with the Latino community member, with the Latino community. I know that you probably don't have a lot of business from this specific community. Would you give me free kits? And, you know, and I can promote your business. So that was another way of being able to have kits and give those to community members. That was pre-Mellon funding. Another thing I was thinking about, and I will probably do, you know, even though I have a permanent budget now, is trying to team up with local businesses, right? Can they sponsor some kits, or can they sponsor some type of supplies that's going to help community members, right? And then also, you know, going back to the university and seeing what other type of funding I can get. But yeah, it's it's all about strategy. I know you all probably know this is looking in different areas for those resources that are going to fit.
Here, we have another question from our colleague, Deanie Metro Roland. He says, this is a wonderful project. My question is, how do you balance the need to diversify the public archives of Arizona to include the stories / memories of the BIPOC and LGBTQ communities to present a more accurate and inclusive history of Arizona, I'm sorry, inclusive record of Arizona history, with the need to protect individual members of these communities from unwanted public scrutiny / exposure. And then the part B of that, and hopefully you can see the chat if you want to refer back to it, is similar Similarly, how do you balance the academic goal of portraying Arizona history and all its diversity, warts and all, with the sensitivity of letting communities tell their own stories in ways that build and sustain community pride and encourage engagement with public archives?
I'm rereading again.
Okay.
Um, so I think that's a unwanted public, uh, that's interesting. So we do have, I think by making community members or empowering community archivists, right, we're giving them the control, right? We're saying we have some indigenous communities who are like, no, we don't want to preserve this. This shouldn't be preserved, right? We have some, queer elders who are like, I don't want to share this. It's not appropriate for me, right? But we have other people who, want to share everything, right? And so um, I think it all comes down to like individual experiences and interactions that we have with community members. I think creating that relationship and the clear line of communication between us is really important, because then we're able to work with community members to have their needs met or concerns met, right? Um, and the second question, so I think, I I have my issues with the profession and academia, as a person from these communities. But I think I'm very happy and proud to be working at ASU because of our overall charter and mission. Um, I'm able to do all of this stuff, even though building this has been so extremely hard and a lot of emotional labor. I've been able to do this work because I'm at an institution like ASU. We measure our success by, not who we exclude, but who we include, right? And our institution is very much about socially embedding ourselves into local communities to improve the communities, right? And I think, and I don't personally do that by going into a community and being like, I'm a professional archivist, let me save you. It's more like, I'm a professional archivist, this is what I know, you know, this might help you, if you're comfortable, share your knowledge with me, and how can we build this together? And so I think I've been able to do this work because there's bigger support when it comes to vision, right? And to, strategy, and to how to really lay the foundation for something that's going to continue after I'm gone, right? And when you're talking about sustainability, we're building something that is not sustained by the university. It's going to be sustained by the community, because they're going to, once they have this knowledge, they're going to keep sharing it. They're going to have real control over it. It's not something ASU owns. It's not something that I own, right? I'm not doing this for my career. I'm doing this to help community members. Um, so yeah, I hope that answered your question. If not, feel free to add like a follow-up question.
Great. One of the things that I think kind of stood out to me was when you talked about the 7 stages of healing and just kind of contextualizing archives as, kind of this like a healing process. And it makes you think about, what's been lost over the years, by not doing this record keeping. So I thought that was a really, thoughtful, like interesting take on that. And it would be interesting to see if, like when we're looking at archival theory and how, kind of the next, that as, we're putting new professionals out into the world, if, there's, education can be kind of centered on that. There's a lot you can learn in library school about, this is how you do a call number, or, this is how you would process a collection, but just that, um, you know, the big picture, you know, archives is healing and the process that you go through. I thought that was, you know, really, you know, kind of a wonderful area of research and that you've been working on.
Yeah, just to add to that, the picture I showed of the little girls in the Salt River Tribe community, the day before they got their archive kits, we actually did an oral history day with them. And so we had some of their elders, family members come into the summer camp. It was a summer camp. And they were interviewing an elder, the little girls were, and they asked about the elder's childhood, and the elder talked about their experience in Indian boarding schools here in Arizona. Um, and you know, the person started crying. And you know, the trauma comes up whenever we talk, whenever we engage with each other, whenever we humanize each other, right? And that's what I mean about entering the different stages of conocimiento, of knowledge, right? Is you go when you have the time to sit down and to acknowledge all the things that have happened to you, to your ancestors. um, there's a healing component in that, right? And I think our profession has never, I think we're finally starting to understand the emotions and how sacred this work is, right? It's not just a repository, it's not something dead, static, you know, it's something that is living because it lives within us, the memory, the stories. Um, and I also wanted to make one comment about so education, right? We're constantly learning from each other, right? And I think that's the beauty about the work that we're doing is, you know, there's no hierarchy. We're all equal and we're all learning from each other. And, you know, I do want to make sure that I say this. You can be white and do this work. Um, my project archivist, Alana Varner, she left us in November of 2020. So she wasn't here to complete the project, but you know, she was with me for over 3 years. She's white. She's a white archivist. And I think, and I mentioned this in my paper that just got published, right? You can be white and do this work in a way that doesn't center you, that centers the community. And you know, I don't call Alana an ally, I call her an accomplice because she has been helping me, the community, dismantle those power structures, right? So she's an accomplice in dismantling white supremacy. And so that's what we need. We need more people to speak up for these communities, to center these communities. Um, that's the only way there's going to be real change. And that makes people uncomfortable. Decentering yourself, acknowledging, just like BIPOC are reliving historical trauma, white people are also potentially having to acknowledge the trauma in their lines, right? Like what, you know, their ancestors potentially did, or, you know, just collective memory, acknowledging collective memory, right? So I want to make sure that I say that you can be doing this work. Um, um, but there's a time to there's a time to take lead and there's a time not to.
Yeah, I like the way that you you know, you mentioned there's no hierarchy here, that it's, you know, we're all, everybody is sharing knowledge and you know, kind of working together, which I think oftentimes you know, kind of when you're in academia, there very much is a certain like hierarchy. So having everybody kind of working towards the common goal and being on the same playing field was, that was really stuck out to me. Does anybody else have any questions they would like to ask Nancy while she's here? She will be joining us for at the conclusion of our lecture series. We will be featuring all of the wonderful experts and scholars that are going to be sharing their projects with us. So we definitely will have time then to ask Nancy more. I know there were some folks that were not able to make it today, but we're thrilled that it was recorded. So I'm sure folks will, have more questions then. So I guess without further delay, thank you again, Nancy, for joining us. It was a pleasure, and I'm so glad we got to hear more about the work that you're doing. It's really amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nancy.
Can I leave now or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
I wasn't
All
sure if
right.
you were. Wasn't sure.
Goodbye.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye.
Nancy.
Actually, it's not letting me leave.